We'll start with the disturbing and work our way up to the most horrifying afterlife theories. Eternal recurrence. Eternal recurrence is a philosophical idea most famously pushed by Friedrich Nietzsche in the late 1800s. The main idea is that time is infinite, but the number of possible arrangements of matter and energy in the universe is finite. And given infinite time, those finite arrangements must eventually happen again. Therefore, every event, including your life, would occur again and again. Every single moment in exact detail on an endless loop. The same breakfast you had this morning, the same bad days that you have, the same decisions, good and bad, playing out on an endless loop. Nietzsche framed this idea as a test for how you actually feel about your own existence. If you found out right now that you had to relive your entire life an infinite number of times, with no variation, would that horrify you, or would you be okay with it? The part that makes it especially disturbing is that you'd never know it was happening either. So, you'd make every mistake again, feel every loss again, forever, without ever realizing it's happening. You'd also subscribe to this channel every single time as well. Some physicists and cosmologists have even treated this idea as a real scientific possibility. In some models, the universe expands, then eventually shrinks back down and triggers another Big Bang. If each new cycle starts under the exact same conditions, the same events could happen all over again in the same order. Scientists like Paul Steinhardt and Neil Turok have published serious research on these cyclic universe theories. Nietzsche called eternal recurrence the heaviest thought. And after considering all of this, it's easy to see why. Reincarnation. Reincarnation is the belief that after you die, your consciousness, or soul, moves into a new body and starts a completely fresh life. Versions of this idea appear across Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, and many other traditions, and on the surface it sounds like the most hopeful option on this list. But some traditions see reincarnation differently. In Buddhist philosophy, rebirth isn't necessarily a reward. It's more of a continuation of a cycle called samsara, which is essentially a never-ending loop of life, suffering, and death, and the goal is to break free from the cycle completely. If reincarnation is real, you would have lived hundreds or thousands of times in the past, as entirely different people in entirely different eras, with no memory of any previous life carrying forward. Every version of you that has ever existed suffered, made choices, experienced loss, and died with no awareness of the bigger picture they were a part of. In several traditions, the circumstances of the life you're born into are shaped directly by the actions of your previous lives through the concept of karma, meaning every difficult thing you're dealing with right now might be a consequence of something a version of you did in a life you can't access or remember. On top of that, psychiatrist Ian Stevenson from the University of Virginia spent decades documenting cases of young children who reported specific memories of previous lives, including names, locations, and verifiable details that checked out. His research didn't prove reincarnation, but it was peer-reviewed and taken seriously enough by enough researchers to not be easily dismissed. Quantum immortality. Quantum immortality is a theory that comes directly out of quantum physics, specifically from the many worlds interpretation first proposed by physicist Hugh Everett in 1957. The idea is that every time a quantum event occurs, the universe branches into separate versions of itself, each reflecting a different possible outcome. When you apply this to the concept of death, the theory suggests that whenever there's a chance you could die, there is also at least one version of reality where you survive. And since you can only experience reality while you're still conscious, you would always find yourself in the version where you lived. From your own point of view, you would never die. You would just keep living through scenario after scenario, no matter how unlikely the survival becomes. What makes this idea unsettling is imagining what that would look like over time. As the years pass, everyone you know eventually dies, but somehow you're still here because there is always one more branch where your heart is still beating. Some physicists take the many worlds interpretation seriously, and many consider it one of the most mathematically consistent ways of explaining quantum mechanics. Physicist Max Tegmark has even talked about quantum immortality in his academic work. Simulation theory. The simulation hypothesis, first proposed by philosopher Nick Bostrom in 2003, is the idea that if a civilization ever becomes advanced enough to create super realistic virtual worlds with conscious beings inside them, then it could end up creating way more simulated minds than real ones. If this is true, then statistically, you'd be more likely to be inside a simulation than in base reality. If we are in a simulation, what happens if the simulation suddenly stops? Like the creators turn it off or lose power? If that happened, everything inside it, including every person, would just instantly end with no warning. On the flip side, what if the simulation never ends, and there's no way to escape or even detect it? It would be built so perfectly that nothing inside it could prove it isn't real. Everyone would just live their lives without ever knowing that they're literally living inside of a computer program. Philosopher David Chalmers has argued that even if we are in a simulation, life inside it would still be real in the only way that matters, because it still feels real to us. Some other public figures like Elon Musk and Neil deGrasse Tyson have said they think it's very possible that we're living in a simulation right now. The Nothingness theory. The Nothingness theory is what a lot of scientists consider to be the most probable afterlife outcome. The theory is that when you die, your brain shuts down, your consciousness ends, and there is nothing on the other side. Literally nothing, since the part of you that could register any kind of experience no longer exists. The reason this disturbs people more than almost anything else on this list is that your brain can't really picture what nothing is. Every time you try to picture non-existence, your brain instinctively puts a version of you inside a scene to observe it, like a dark, empty void or something. But in reality, you wouldn't be experiencing anything since you wouldn't exist. Philosopher Thomas Nagel wrote about this. His point was that death is bad because the specific version of you that exists right now, with your memories, your personality, your entire way of looking at the world, just ends. Completely, permanently, and with nothing replacing it. On the other hand, the ancient philosopher Epicurus argued the opposite. The idea that death isn't something to fear because when you're alive it isn't happening, and when it happens you aren't there to experience anything anyway. Eternal conscious isolation. Contrary to the nothingness theory, the eternal conscious isolation theory suggests that when you die your consciousness just continues on forever. You would just sit in a blank state, fully awake, with nothing around you to perceive. Some philosophers have described this as the most realistic version of hell. Not only would you be extremely lonely, but your mind would have no way of dealing with it. Human consciousness wasn't built for a truly empty environment. It requires input to function normally, and when input disappears entirely, the brain starts inventing things. Sensory deprivation studies have shown that within hours of removing all external stimulation, people begin experiencing vivid hallucinations that feel completely real. Within days, subjects in isolation tanks have reported full conversations with people who weren't there, scenes playing out in front of them, and a complete inability to tell what was actually happening versus what they were generating themselves. Now imagine that, but never ending, with no body or environment to fall back on. There's also no framework for measuring time when every moment is identical to the last. Minutes and centuries would become indistinguishable from each other, which some philosophers argue is worse than any finite period of suffering. Several serious researchers, including physicist Roger Penrose, have explored the idea that consciousness might be something fundamental in the universe, not just something produced by the brain. If that were true, it raises the question of what happens to consciousness if it's no longer tied to a body or environment. This theory suggests that your consciousness would just keep existing, but with nothing to see, hear, or interact with. If you like this video, subscribe for similar ones. Thanks for watching!